for an Alberta perspective on the proposed changes and whether they'll ease frustration in that process. I'm joined by Dennis McConaughey. He is, of course, a former TransCanada executive, the author of the book Dysfunction Canada After Keystone XL. Dennis, we talked about this just the other day. You said we need a new process. There is a new process. What do you make of the announcement made today?
Very little that's positive. I think that it will be poorly received by Canadian industry and especially the Canadian resource industry. What we didn't need was to deconstruct the NEB. What we didn't need was to elevate SIA in a reconstituted form to be a kind of parallel assessment agency. And what we needed to do was to get the politics out of the process early and to have the regulatory process deal with its basic technical and safety-related functions after we'd made the fundamental assessment of do we want these projects to proceed or not, on the basis of whether they have economic value to the country and are within accepted technology and safety constraints. What we got today was a promise of a 24-month improved process through a new, which will include two new entities, a impact assessment agency, which, as I said before, is SIA warmed over, and a gutted NEB in this national energy regulator. As to whether the process will actually run 24 months, I'm very skeptical of, because before a process can start, you have to have a complete application. And how long is that going to take before this process deems a complete application? These are real-time effects that haunted the last decade. You can look at the Energy East experience. It took them almost 3+ years to get to a complete application before this 24-hour clock started. I'm very skeptical that these are meaningful improvements from what should have been done, which was adjusting the existing NEB process in the end, because the NEB had been an entirely competent and entirely an entity with integrity and a long track record of solid decisions. So I think this will be actually will not actually improve the process and doesn't actually improve the dynamic that you were talking about earlier that's unfolding right now in respect of Trans Mountain.
Well, and that to me is a really interesting part of this, is it sort of feels like this announcement and these sweeping changes, biggest changes we've seen in a generation, have sort of arrived in a vacuum that doesn't address this simmering and potentially catastrophic battle that's happening between Alberta and BC.
Absolutely. The issue with Trans Mountain is absolutely urgent. This announcement today is going to impact future investment, and that's critically important, but that's tomorrow's problem. What had to be done last week and what needs to be done this week is not just rhetoric from the Prime Minister or the Minister of the Environment or Jim Carr. What has to happen is a tangible statement from the Canadian government that it's going to use its fundamental powers if BC does not stand down. And those fundamental powers is that this project is declared in the national interest, and so that there is no ambiguity about what law has to be respected. Because as your previous speaker pointed out, there's been 4+ years of regulatory process on whether or not the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain expansion is in the Canadian interest. So, that's really the urgent test that this country's got to find an answer to, and it's got to come out of the federal government and the highest leadership of that government.
Do you have any optimism? I mean, how do you close this out for us? Where are you feeling?
I have to take the sentiments that have been continually expressed by those politicians that they stand behind their approval. Standing behind their approval takes more than rhetoric. They're going to actually have to do real things, and those start with ensuring that BC totally understands that the federal powers to ensure this project proceeds are going to be exercised, and that they are exercised on the ground in the months and years ahead, so that there's no disruption to this approval process. And that, I think, is what the industry is urgently waiting for, than just saying the approval exists. It's got to be supplemented by the federal government saying to British Columbia, I am using all of my full powers to ensure that this project that is in the national interest is actually constructed.
Right, and I mean, right now it's industry, it's workers, and it's investors all waiting on this. So Dennis, we really appreciate you making time today. Thanks for this.
Thank you.
Dennis McConaughey, former TransCanada executive and author of Dysfunction Canada After Keystone XL.